Today, we're talking about a film so unbelievably, insanely reckless that it's quite possibly the most dangerous one ever made. Roar from 1981. And don't worry, there'll be nothing graphic in this video. Now, as you can see from the cover, while thankfully no animals were harmed in the making of it, over 70 cast and crew members were. And that is just scratching the surface, because after digging through a bunch of old articles and behind the scenes footage, it's somehow even crazier than that. We're talking millions of dollars in damage, untrained animals, countless injuries, unprecedented chaos, and more than a decade of production hell. All for what was meant to be a fun little adventure comedy film. It all started in the late 1960s, with Tippi Hedren, who'd gotten a lot of recognition from starring in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, and her then-husband Noel Marshall, who was also her talent agent and producer of films like The Exorcist. During that time, they happened to be in the middle of nowhere in Africa and came across an abandoned house that was completely overrun by wild lions, and thought that not only would this concept make for a cool movie, but could help bring attention to the increasing problem of illegal hunting, which was endangering the animal population. So as soon as they came back to America, they began developing the idea, with Tippi being the star power and Noel writing and directing for the first time in his career. And from the get-go, he wanted a lot of lions. Everywhere. But basically, every single animal handler they got a hold of could only bring a few, and warned them that the more they introduce, the higher the risk of them attacking each other as well as everyone around them was going to be. And given the obvious potential danger, the idea was deemed as impossible, irresponsible, and as one had put it, utterly insane. I feel like for most people, hearing that would be more or less the end of it. But that was the 70s, and you could literally just buy a lion cub from an ad in a magazine. So I guess the only logical solution was to simply raise a bunch of their own, despite having absolutely no experience whatsoever. So over the course of the next few years, together with their children, they actually lived with all the exotic animals. And since they were also rescuing a lot, the number quickly grew to over 100.
You know, these animals were coming to us, lions and tigers and leopards and mountain lions.
And all the kids grew up having lions in the house. We thought it was a very normal thing.
It became a full-on family project. All of their children were either going to act in it or help behind the camera. And they themselves were all in, spending all of their savings to buy a land, build a set house, feed the animals, and change the surroundings to make it look like Africa. But there was no studio behind it. It was self-financed and therefore not enough money. So they couldn't afford things you might consider necessary, like a medic on set, insurance, a professional animal trainer, or rather 300 of them if they were to do it by the book, or even enough crew members. But nonetheless, after years of prep, there was no going back. And in 1976, it was time to start filming.
This particular situation probably had no precedent. As it developed, Roar was one of the incredible sagas in the history of movie making. It actually became biblical in proportions.
The script, if we can call it that, was more of a general guideline. Because the animals were so unpredictable, they were filming with up to 5 cameras at a time and then changing parts of the story based on what they did. Which is also why, fun fact, they're sharing the writing and directing credit. But basically, we follow a scientist who lives on a nature preserve in Africa and believes that in order to properly study the big cats, he has to live with them and be a part of the pride. One day, a committee is coming to review his grant, and one of the members, who had graduated from the school of cartoonish villains, disapproves of his methods and to his big dismay, ends up getting attacked by a tiger. At the same time, his family is coming to visit, and since he's out there trying to fix that whole mess, they find themselves alone in the house, and we spend the majority of the film with them as they're dealing with all the wildlife. Bonus points for the birds reference, which, by the way, you would assume that Tippi would think twice before filming with animals again, because she did get attacked by some birds when she was filming The Birds, but life is a funny thing. As I was watching, one of the things that immediately stood out to me was how hilariously mismatched the tone is. It's clear that they're going for this fun, upbeat, family Disney vibe with catchy songs and silly jokes, but at the same time, you can see the horror in their faces and feel the anxiety as they're trying to casually deliver a line and stay in character, knowing that a full-grown lion could attack them at any given moment. There are a few moments in here that are genuinely making me uncomfortable to watch, which is unintentionally turning this film into a proper nail-biting thriller. Practically every other minute something happens that could never be allowed on any normal film set. And the only thing that kept me going was knowing that by the end of it, everyone was fine. But that doesn't mean they got off easy. There are plenty of close calls and real injuries that made the final cut, some of which are bad enough that they had to be written into the story, but thankfully nothing too graphic. Yeah, you can tell he's hurting here. But just to name a few, Tippi broke her leg, John got bitten in the head, Melanie got clawed and needed a facial reconstructive surgery, and Noel got bitten in the hand, the neck, and the leg so many times that he developed a gangrene.
Somebody released the lions early, and all I could see was Noel just flying out that window.
He got bitten by Donnie really bad in the neck, so bad that this lion was dragging Dad out of the bathtub.
And then Noel would go, okay, on to the next scene.
And that is just the cast. The crew didn't have it much better either. According to some sources I came across, there were hundreds of injuries throughout the making of the film, and perhaps the worst one might be the cinematographer, who got bitten so hard in the back of his head while holding the camera that he needed over 120 stitches to reattach his scalp back, and yet he came back and finished the film. And to be fair, the visuals are easily one of the best parts of the movie. There's so many amazing shots, honestly. Other than the one when he's racing the giraffe in the beginning, I think that actually this one might be my favorite. But going back to the danger, I couldn't help but wonder, why was everyone risking so much? And it didn't really click for me until I started thinking about the characters. As mentioned, this is not necessarily a film you watch for the amazing plot, character development, or even acting, because frankly, there's not much of that. But out of all the flat, cartoonish characters, there was something odd about Noel. He was supposed to be this charismatic, fun, fearless hero, but to me, he came across as intense and borderline unhinged. And as it turns out, there was a bit of method acting. As a director, he'd push himself and everyone around him too far beyond what's reasonable, and put the crew and cast, remember, his own family, in extremely dangerous situations.
He did some really crazy things.
The lions are coming through walls and just beating these poor people half to death. And Noel's going, keep filming, keep filming.
And all the animal trainers had been taught never interfere with anything with Dad, because he would always say, I wasn't in any danger. But he was very intense and he was fearless and he was amazing with the animals. To the point, I think he took too many chances, and I was a little bit of a buffer between Sanity and Dad. And so Tippi and Melanie would come to me, and then I'd go to Dad. I remember one time I said, Dad, Melanie's afraid in this one scene, so I think here's what we can do to make her feel comfortable. Dad says, that's stupid, go tell her not to be afraid. I go, Dad, fear is in people's head and it is real to them. You can't tell them to not have it. And he goes, well, that's stupid, just tell her she's gotta do it.
So making this movie was a very long and very frustrating process. It took them 11 years in total. Sometimes they would film for a whole day only to get a few seconds of usable footage. A single scene would usually take weeks or even months to complete, and all in all, they filmed for 5 whole years, which, considering it's only supposed to be 2 days in the film itself, I have to admit, might be one of the most impressive continuity works I've ever seen in a movie. Part of the reason why it took so long, as if it wasn't hard enough already to deal with all the animals, was that they essentially had to do it twice. A few years into it, when they were almost 90% finished, a huge flood destroyed the majority of the set, including the editing station and all of the footage. So they had no choice but to rebuild and start over. Then there was a giant bushfire in which all the animals were rescued, but those disasters cost millions of dollars in damage, money they did not have. So as a result, they were forced to sell everything they owned, the houses, the valuables, the memorabilia, and they were essentially backed into a corner in which they had to finish the movie.
We needed money so badly that I took my coat that I wore on the birds and my pearls and another ring, and I hacked them.
They were doing everything themselves, both in front and behind the camera. They even had to do their own stunts, which, by the looks of it, did not have safety in mind. So it all leads back to Noel Marshall, who, despite his ambition, was simply too inexperienced on a film set, and unlike a lion, had bitten far more than he could chew. The editing can be super chaotic at times because they're trying to piece together a bunch of disconnected footage. The writing is as simple as it gets. We have two basic storylines, one of them being about the good and the bad lion. We have an underlying thing going on about their marriage falling apart, but it all stays pretty close to the surface. It honestly feels like a bunch of friends who just grabbed a camera and sort of went along with it. As in, you go down there and say something and I'll go over there and we'll figure it out. It is as B-movie as it gets, but in a way that is also part of its charm. Something that no one can deny is that the set design, the immersion, the realism is as good as it gets. It has some of the most amazing footage of animals interacting with each other, with humans, and with everyday items that you'll ever see. That it almost doesn't matter it barely has a plot. And in a few rare moments, like the one when he's talking with a lion, or in fact the entire ending montage, are the ones that are truly hitting the mark of what it could have been, or rather what they wanted it to be, this sweet, wholesome family adventure. And it has to be acknowledged that the songs are super catchy. But nonetheless, at least to me, this would have worked 8,000 times better had they actually fully embraced and gone all in on the horror aspect. I mean, all you have to do is just switch the music and re-edit it a little bit, and it's good to go.
They're just playing. The closer you get to them, the more they'd like you, the safer you'd be.
They actually did lean into the danger aspect in some of the countries when it was released, and it did okay in there, but for the most part it was marketed as this goofy comedy, and it ended up being a huge box office bomb. To make matters worse, they couldn't even release it in theaters in America. There were some issues with the legality and distributor profit share, so after more than a decade of sacrifice and literally blood, sweat and tears, Roar was doomed to fail before it ever had a chance to succeed. But despite the unfortunate result, one thing that was constant was that everyone involved seemed to genuinely love and care about the animals. And that was important to me. I never saw anything to suggest otherwise.
When they love, it is just all out. They never turned on me, ever. What happened is if they were fighting and I was in the middle of their fights, they thought I was a lion. So I got bitten.
But now, they had over 150 animals. Just feeding them alone was going to be an enormous weekly expense. So Tippi Hedren took the lead to establish the Roar Foundation and Shambala Preserve, which still exists to this day.
I feel that it was sort of the hand of God moving in strange ways, that this whole life of mine was leading up to this.
Some of the people involved with this movie used it as a springboard. The cinematographer Jan de Bont, for example, went on to work on much bigger Hollywood movies, and Melanie Griffith had a successful acting career, but for others, it left a permanent mark. Tippi and Noel divorced because of it. He never made another film, and for the most part, almost everyone actively avoids talking about it, except John Marshall, who is still having nightmares, but trying to preserve its unusual legacy with a sense of humor.
I am still, and everyone is still amazed to this day that nobody died. I mean, again, let's get honest. It wasn't an actor's movie. It was a stay alive movie.
And now, after all those years, it is finally being released again and starting to gain a cult following. Which got me thinking, what is the legacy of this film? I mean, they had a good intention. They wanted to raise awareness that the big cats should be preserved and left alone, but let's be honest, they went about it in the most irresponsible way possible. So I'm not entirely sure if it's the film itself, or the making of it that is sending the real message here. The movie is both good and bad at the same time. It's professional and amateur. It is funny and scary, but for all the wrong reasons. And at the end of the day, undeniably unique. So that's Roar. Have you seen it? Do you want to see it? What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments below. I read all of them, and I'll see you in the next one.